Welcome to Rock and Roll Fridays, a podcast on musical encounters and
Welcome
life.
to Rock and Roll Fridays, and I'm so happy to have a guest, Nancy Barile. Welcome to Rock and Roll Fridays.
Thanks for having me on.
So this is an area that I do not know about, and I'm so happy to talk to you. Punk. So tell me your background and tell me and tell all the listeners, what is punk? Because does punk even exist anymore?
Well, I would say my definition of punk is I don't want to ever define it. So for me, punk was about the music. It was fast, it was loud, it was angry, it was fun. And so for me, it fed kind of the rebellion that I had inside me growing up as the daughter of a Marine and also someone who went to a very patriarchal, repressive Catholic school.
Yeah.
So when I discovered punk, I was, 17, 18, 19 years old, and I was going out on my own and I was ready for my life to begin, and punk was there for me. And it was just great.
Yeah. And that was in the Philadelphia area, correct?
Yes, that was in the Philadelphia area.
So I'm sure, in this area, Zipperhead is very well known, in South Street, right around the punk and rebellion scene. For our listeners that are national, talk a little bit about that area and what it was like for punk music and Philadelphia music.
So I came up in the late 70s and early 80s. So that area was still a bit dangerous, a bit blighted. The TLA theater was there, excuse me. And, there were sometimes concerts there and shows and movies and stuff, but places like Zipperhead didn't exist yet. So there was a store called Rosebud, and there were, cool places to go, but that area really wasn't where we experienced punk. Punk for me started at the Hot Club, which was, a little further down the street.
Yeah.
And then at places like Omni and Love. And then when we started doing our own shows at the Elk Center at 16th and Fitzwater.
Wow.
So those were the places where I hung out. And I also, I lived at 12th and Chestnut in the Adelphia House, which is kind of like Philly's Chelsea Hotel, like
totally.
Artists and musicians and, fun people. And not long after I was living there, they built a club in the basement called the East Side Club. And then there were bands that played there. So that was like really convenient, to just run downstairs and there you are, So Philly had a really vibrant, exciting, but very dangerous punk rock scene at the time. And the danger didn't come from within the punk rock scene. It came from locals who didn't want us in their neighborhood, particularly Kensington.
Right.
And police officers,
Right. Yeah.
Cops could not wrap their head around punk being anything but something, subversive. And, it is. And, but we took a lot of heat from the police. And so those were our threats. Our threats really weren't from within, but Philly had a great scene, and every major band stopped and played in Philadelphia, and it was always epic. And so
what were some of the bands that were for people, like I said, I'm not a punk, historian. What were some of the bands that are kind of like starter, if you wanted to check out punk, who do you what are your go-tos, and then what are the kind of underbelly ones that no one would hear about, right?
Yeah, so I came up on bands like Iggy Pop, the Ramones, Stiff Little Fingers, The Clash were like, my idols, Blondie, bands like that. And then after I moved into Philadelphia, my taste sort of started to go to what like a subgenre of punk called hardcore. And then the bands that I really loved, the hardcore bands that I really loved were bands like the Bad Brains, Minor Threat, SSD Control, bands like that. And those were Black Flag.
Yeah.
Those were the bands that I really sort of gravitated to. I don't know why, because that's a very physical, energetic scene. But I just love that music, and it really sort of soothed my soul. So.
And I talk about this a lot, from jazz to punk, from rock and roll, jam bands, hip hop. If it speaks to you and it motivates you or makes you feel, then it's working, right? Like whatever.
Exactly. I mean, if you look in my book, I kept a list of the first 100 concerts I went to from when I started going when I was 15. And it's bands like Rod Stewart, Alice Cooper, David Bowie, Sparks, Roxy Music, all Queen was a band that I saw. Kiss, I saw a million times. And so then, and then it just, naturally progressed into sort of the a little more dangerous, a little more edgy stuff that I really started to like and really enjoy.
Let's talk about your book, and it's a great title, I'm Not Holding Your Coat. So where did the title come from?
So long after, I had sort of gotten out of the hardcore scene in 1985 and, pursued life as a, in different areas. And I would join Facebook groups about punk. And I would tell stories like, on this anniversary date, we were in Kensington seeing the Dead Kennedys and the locals threw a bomb at us. Or, we were in Kensington seeing Black Flag and the locals, staged a riot. And so, I would tell these different stories, or even bands that I saw in New York. And invariably, some man born in 1990 would correct me or contradict or refute what I was saying at a show that I was actually at, or that I actually promoted myself, and tell me, oh no, you're wrong, that's not, and it would drive me crazy. And then I would see things like, well, there weren't a lot of girls at shows. We would tell our girls to hold our coats while we went into the pit and up front. And I was horrified by that. It offended me on so many levels. So that's why I named the book I'm Not Holding Your Coat, because, and there's plenty of photographic and some video evidence that women, especially in Philadelphia, were not only figuratively, but also literally right up front and in the pit at shows. And you can see that in plenty of photography and videos that still exist to this day. So that's why I named the book that title, because I was sick of it.
So tell us about the book. What is it about? What motivated you to write it? Where can people get it? And so a couple reasons why I wrote it. Number one, I became a high school teacher, and from rebellion to a high school teacher.
Exactly, right. There's no more rebellious job than being a teacher, let me tell you, especially right now.
They know your past, right?
They do now. They didn't originally. Originally, I kind of kept it on the DL because I didn't know how it would play with administrators and parents and stuff. But now, my kids know, and I teach in an urban community. And so my kids, there's very few kids that are really into punk or anything like that. They're more into world music, hip hop, things like that. So, and over the years, I won a couple awards for teaching, and you always get asked the question, well, what makes you a good teacher? And when I sat down and I really reflected and I really thought about it, I realized that it was punk rock that made me a good teacher. It enabled me to connect and relate to my alienated and marginalized teens, mainly because I was one and so were my friends. It helped me to create assignments that would enable kids to see things from different perspectives and to think independently. And it enabled me to, sort of get kids to take a stand and speak up for something that they didn't agree with. And also the whole do-it-yourself attitude of punk rock. In the community in the school that I teach, we don't have a lot of money. So if I want to go on field trips or get books or bring in guest speakers, it's all do it yourself. And I have to raise the money to do that. So that was, somebody asked me to, write a little article about why, how punk rock made me a better teacher. And I wrote it, and Education Week picked it up and it went kind of viral. So I said, oh, I have something here,
Yeah.
And so I wrote the book, and I got a high-powered agent right away. And he was like, oh, I'm going to send this out to auction. And I'm like, great, I'm going to retire. But what happened was people either liked the punk rock story or they liked the teacher story. They didn't like them together.
Right.
So the punk rock story was finite. It ended in 1982. So I pulled that off, and I got a really good publisher in Bazillion Points, who are international and really great and have done a lot of great books. And so very heavy, badass kind of publisher. And so I was, they picked it up, and I was like so excited that they put it out. So you can get my book at bazillionpoints.com, or you can get it on Amazon, at cool record stores and skate shops across the country. And it sort of chronicles my time growing up as a white suburban Catholic schoolgirl, discovering music, first with those bands that I named, like Rod Stewart and Bowie. And
Nancy, you know what's next? It's going to be the movie.
Well, that's
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm already seeing the movie.
A couple people said that. I've had some interesting emails. I don't know how I feel about it, but it might be cool.
It's all about the story, right? It's all
exactly.
About the story.
And the book is also a love letter to Philadelphia, which really, if you live near there, there's something about Philly that gets inside your heart and it stays with you forever. And I saw that when I was down there last weekend. It's, Philadelphia is just an incredible place. I wouldn't mind, coming back and retiring there.
Yeah.
It's also a love story of the time when I met my husband 40 years ago. We're still together to this day. And so it's, it's got a little bit of everything in it.
It's a movie waiting to be made. So I can't let you go. I want everyone to pick up I'm Not Holding Your Coat. And I will promote that on Rock and Roll Fridays social platforms. But, the premise of Rock and Roll Fridays is tell us your story. You obviously have a lot of stories, but is there one in particular where you're like, I can't believe this is happening? Where am I? Who am I hanging out with?
Okay, yeah. I have a crazy story where I ran into a lot of celebrities in one day. A lot of people that I like and respect, and some that I wasn't so sure about yet. So I had seen U2 play at the Bijou Cafe in Philadelphia, their very first tour when they opened up for Beruga. And there was a huge snowstorm that night. There were probably only about 20 people in the place. We got to hang out and talk with the band, and they were nice guys. They were really nice guys, but, I couldn't really understand them. They had these really heavy Irish accents and stuff. And, I wasn't really, they were great. They were good, but they weren't punk enough for me at the time, which is kind of funny. So flash forward a couple months later, I take my little brother, who's graduating high school, to see the Clash at Bonds in New York City. So we make a day of it. We take the train up and we go into the city, and we go down to the Lower East Side, and we go to a place called Trash and Vaudeville, which is kind of like a funky shop that has like cool punk clothing and stuff like that. And as we were in the store, and all of a sudden my brother goes, oh, look, there's that like U2 singer guy. And Bono walked in. And I didn't want him to remember me from the night of the blizzard. So I hid behind like some t-shirts, I was hiding from Bono. Like it's just crazy to me to think of that today.
Yeah, right.
And we went across the street and ran into John Belushi. And that, we were far more impressed. So now I take my brother and my boyfriend at the time, Brian, we all go out to eat some little Italian restaurant in Soho. And and they had all those like wine bottles behind the wall, in the racks. Yeah. And my little brother said, I'm going to take one of these bottles of wine. And I was like, Catholic schoolgirl, like, we don't steal, I was like, no, like, don't you dare. And he said, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. And so, I had paid the bill. He grabbed the bottle of wine. We went running down the street, and we were just laughing our butts off. And we ran literally right into the Clash, minus Joe Strummer.
That is awesome.
So that's Paul, that's Chopper, that's Mick. And we're the Clash to me were the biggest band, the greatest band, the most influential band in my life. And we were so starstruck, we could not even speak. So my brother handed Mick the bottle of wine because he wanted him to sign it. And Mick said, thanks a lot, mate, and took the bottle of wine and off they went. And we just fell on the sidewalk, dying laughing, screaming our heads off because, thank God Joe Strummer wasn't there because I probably would have just dropped dead on the site because I really loved Joe Strummer. So it was just the other three. And that was, one of my favorite days.
Oh, yeah.
The sad thing about it was the concert ended up getting canceled because they had oversold the show by billions. And if you ever see the Radio Clash video, you can see some footage from the people were so pissed that they didn't play. And then we didn't have enough money to do the whole thing over again. So I saw the Clash several times after that, but not that day, except when we literally ran into them.
That is amazing. That is a New York story too, where you're running into, that's New York City, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Every time I went to New York City, I was running into Andy Warhol. I was running, seeing somebody. And so it was always a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, let's get that movie made with
Okay.
I'm Not Holding Your Coat. I see it. So everyone, check out I'm Not Holding Your Coat. And Nancy, thanks so much for being on Rock and Roll Fridays. It was awesome.
And thanks for having me.
Awesome.